Picture this scene. 480 Marines trapped in enemy territory. Bullets almost gone. Enemy fire coming from every hillside. Command had already started writing up the death reports. The rules said hold back. The rules said don't move. But in that critical moment, when staying quiet meant everyone would die, one forgotten sharpshooter chose to break every rule. This is the account of Sergeant Elena Marquez, the Marine everyone called useless, who drew her own boundary and brought an entire battalion home alive. Before we start, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I enjoy seeing our military community spread around the globe. The helmet's sun blazed white against the endless dust, getting into every fold of clothing and equipment. Inside the base, sounds of laughter echoed from the dining hall, loud and carefree, bouncing off concrete barriers. It was the noise of Marines filling their bellies and their hearts before another day on patrol. But out near the distant edge of the training ground, away from the clatter of plates and the buzz of conversation, one person sat alone, legs crossed on a canvas tarp with a weapon stretched across her knees. Sergeant Elena Marquez, 27 years old, United States Marine Corps sharpshooter, worked with perfect rhythm, every movement precise, careful, never rushed. Her build was slight compared to most of the men surrounding her. Barely over 5 feet tall, shoulders slim under the desert tan shirt. Where others projected confidence, she projected precision. She pulled a cleaning cloth through the barrel, inspected the firing mechanism, then wrote something in a small spiral notebook resting against her knee. Her weapon, an M40A5, wasn't just a tool to her. It was part of her thinking process. She recorded every change like it was sacred text. Adjustments on the sight, changes in moisture, barrel condition. She knew exactly how the weapon would perform on any particular day. 2 young Marines walked past on their way to the sleeping quarters, glancing at her with grins that felt like a shove. "There goes the diversity hire sharpshooter," one said just loud enough for her to catch. "Practice range shooter," the other replied, laughing. "Lucky thing targets don't fire back." Neither one stopped walking. Neither one expected her to reply. Elena didn't respond. She just kept cleaning the mechanism and added another line in her book. She'd listened to it all many times before. Useless wait. Token hire. Box-checking sniper. Too short, too reserved, too out of place. Even the experienced sergeants, men who carried 3 tours worth of battle marks, brushed her off with easy confidence. "Marquez does fine with target scores," one of them had mentioned to the company leader, "but actual combat, give her radio duty, keep her where she's helpful, that's all." And that's what they did. Support tasks became her permanent job. Hauling equipment, maintaining communications, managing supply records. She wasn't put in positions on high ground. She wasn't asked to look through her scope in real missions. She was instructed nicely to stick to her role. But what nobody saw because nobody bothered to look was that Elena Marquez had created her own training program in the quiet of long evenings. While others swapped stories in the smoking area, she laid out maps under a dim red flashlight and studied the shapes of land until they became part of her memory. She maintained detailed wind records, noting every change at various times of day and in different valleys. She rehearsed her trigger control with empty chambers until her breathing became as regular as a clock. And in her small green notebook, the one that appeared like nothing more than a shopping list, she documented everything. Bullet trajectory charts, weather adjustments, her own math done by hand in case computers stopped working. Each page was covered with clean handwriting, columns of figures, arrows drawn across grid patterns. It was her personal manual, hidden from those who assumed she had none. On her left arm, typically covered beneath the sleeve of her shirt, was a tattoo, small and basic, the Marine sharpshooter symbol, the scoped weapon surrounded by leaves. She had achieved it through effort and accuracy, through a training program that required perfection and punished mistakes. But here in Helmand, she kept her sleeve pulled down whenever she worked. She had no desire to remind men who already thought she didn't fit in. That was the strange truth of Elena Marquez. She didn't explode with rage when insulted. She didn't fight back when pushed aside. She didn't throw words to prove she deserved respect. She bore the mockery the way she carried her weapon, silently, cautiously, with patience. She was waiting not for approval, but for the certain moment when all the charts and math, all the training and determination would no longer stay hidden. Her background didn't start in Helmand. It started in South Texas, where the night smelled of dirt and mesquite trees, and the skyline stretched wide over flat farmland. Her father, a Marine, who had served twice before, wounds forced him home, brought her up with military precision, even when the closest base was hundreds of miles away. Tasks at sunrise, repairs before morning meal, and at dusk when the sky turned deep purple, he would set up soda cans on fence posts and pass her a worn hunting rifle. Calm breathing, he'd say. Gentle trigger pull, let the shot catch you off guard. By 12, she could knock down every can at 50 yards without flinch. By 16, she outperformed most of the men who visited the farm to hunt. Her father spoke little, but his gaze always held a silent pride. When he died suddenly in her final school year, Elena enlisted not just to respect his memory, but to prove whether she could maintain the same focus he had built into her character. She maintained it well enough to qualify for sniper training, something few women reached, and even fewer got credit for. But in Helmand, written achievements mattered less than the beliefs of those already set in their view. And so she brought her weapon to the practice range, and her notebooks to her bed, enduring the whispers, expanding her skills while others expanded their egos. The base itself was a circle of routine. Patrols heading out, updates coming in, Marines moving through meal lines, countless meetings with the same short phrases. Elena drifted at the boundaries of that flow, seen but not appreciated. And then the orders: 480 Marines, strengthened by extra units, were to advance into a valley thought to be lightly defended. The intelligence report described it as a standard clearing operation, secure and sweep, hold for stability. Maps displayed ridgelines and open terrain, expected path. Command showed it as simple. Elena, sitting at the rear of the meeting room with her notebook balanced on her leg, saw something else. The elevation lines warned of danger, tight entry points, high terrain on 3 sides, killing zones waiting to be activated. She lifted her hand once, calmly. "Sir," she said, voice steady, "this valley, have we thought about the chance of it being a planned ambush? The terrain here," she pointed at the map displayed on the screen, "they could hide a major enemy force. It matches too perfectly." The colonel running the meeting barely looked at her. "Sergeant, monitor gear, not planning. That's beyond your position." A few chuckles spread through the room. "Deadweights discussing strategy now," one Marine said softly. Elena closed her notebook, said nothing else. When the meeting finished, the Marines filed out, adjusting helmets, carrying weapons, joking about how fast the mission would go. Elena observed from the side of the room as they collected equipment, climbed into vehicles and drove toward the entrance of the valley. 480 Marines moving as procedure demanded, carrying the assurance of men who had not yet learned how fast procedure could become a death trap. She stayed behind on support duty. Her instructions were clear: watch communications, monitor supply transfers, stay away from combat operations. It was what she had always been directed, what she had been trained to follow. But as the dust from leaving vehicles floated across the base, and as their shapes became smaller against the horizon, Elena Marquez felt the importance of every number she had recorded in her notebooks, every line she had marked across maps in the silence of midnight. She had examined this valley long before the orders were given. She had pictured exactly how it would trap them, and now with 480 Marines driving into its mouth, she was left watching. The morning following the orders, the meeting room buzzed with the relaxed swagger of men who believed the map would follow their plan. Elena took her typical spot near the back, notebook balanced on her leg, pencil behind one ear. The colonel dragged a red marker across a displayed valley. Ridges, entry routes, holding positions, neat on the screen, messier in reality. When he stopped for questions, she raised her hand with the same calm steadiness she used when aiming. "Sir, the valley's a trap," she said. "These terrain features create overlapping kill zones. If they position machine guns on the ridges, and rocket teams in the low ground. Our vehicles will be stuck in a bowl. He never followed where she pointed. He looked at her name tag. You're here to handle radios, not offer tactics. Laughter rippled through the room. A private mimicked, taking notes, and winked at his friend. Elena's fingers tightened against the cardboard of her notebook, then loosened. The colonel clicked forward, and the red light moved past her. On the shooting range the next morning, the wind blew at an angle left to right, just enough to turn simple shots into challenging ones. Elena lay flat, let the world shrink into crosshairs and heat waves, and adjusted her settings. Breath in, breath out. Metal rang, constant and uncaring. Luck, a young private said behind her when the 500-meter target jumped. A weapons instructor spit dust. Practice targets don't return fire, he said slowly, and paper doesn't cry out. She recorded each shot by type, distance, wind, hold point, impact, and cleaned the weapon to perfection without defending herself. In the dining hall, trays scraped along metal rails. Elena sat and the 4 Marines across from her stood as one, scraping chairs, moving to a far table. Babysitter with a gun, someone said, not trying to lower their voice. She ate anyway, jaw steady, spoon silent against the bowl. The only sound she permitted herself later was the scratch of a pencil in her notebook, darkening the elevation lines where the valley pinched like a closing hand. On base patrol near the vehicle area, 2 Navy SEALs walked past with the easy movement of men who evaluate each other through small details. A few Marines from Elena's unit gathered by a vehicle and watched her adjust an antenna. Dead weight, one declared as if sharing useful information. Never saw a sniper scared to fight. One SEAL's mouth curved at the edge. Another made a noise halfway between a breath and a laugh. Elena finished the radio test, logged the number, and continued on. Mockery advanced from whispers to comments, to labels that tried to pin down reality. Meanwhile, 480 Marines rolled toward the valley. For a time, the radios clicked with reassuring routine. Position updates, route checks, fuel levels. The drone camera showed vehicle dots moving down a dirt path, heat distortion making the image fluid. The first shift came as a missed beat. A vehicle report didn't come through. Then 2 voices talking over each other. Edges became rough. Someone requested foot soldiers. Someone else cursed at an engine that wasn't the issue. Then the sound you learn to recognize once and never forget. The break in a man's voice when the world in front of him explodes. Contact. Enemy contact. Static ate the rest. Another channel. Taking fire. East Ridge. A third voice tried for a report and turned it into gasps. The camera feed filled with heat signature. Gunfire stitched angry marks along the ridges. Smoke burst from the low ground. The vehicle dots compressed and stopped moving. Conversations thinned to murmurs. The duty officer lowered his headset and stared at nothing, as if looking alone could force the feed to change. A lieutenant grabbed a checklist, scanned it, and found no entry for what the screen was displaying. Chairs stopped moving. The room adjusted to a new soundscape. Breathing, clicking, computer cursors, a generator, and one phrase repeated like protection. Hold position, wait, follow the rules. Too dangerous, a major said, voice relieved to find the wording. No air support within 200 meters. A captain echoed it louder as if volume turned caution into action. Regulations are clear. We hold outside the danger zone. On a side screen, a helmet camera showed dust crawling over grass and the horizon bouncing with breaths. Bullets kicked dirt around boots. Directions got shouted without certainty. Elena drifted closer to the back rail, eyes on the drone angle that caught the eastern ridge, just poorly enough to barely show the top of a gun position. She counted bursts and mapped movement patterns in her mind. She read wind in the shape of smoke. The colonel requested option. The major recited the book. We need them to move out of the danger zone. Then we can bring fire support. His tone made the burden sound like a strategy. They can't move, a captain said quietly. Honestly. Then they wait, the major replied, grateful to have a sentence. The laughter from earlier had no place here. Men who had smirked now tried to look occupied. Jokes died into silence. Elena placed her hand on the canvas of her weapon case. The familiar drag of leather under her palm steadied her in a way that had nothing to do with rebellion. On the camera, the machine gun on the eastern ridge started walking bursts down a ravine where Marines tried to crawl low enough to disappear. A rocket team in the low ground shifted for a clean shot, knees digging into the slope. "Too dangerous," the major said again, holding on to the phrase. "Nobody's requesting to drop bombs." Elena said finally, "A rifle will work." The colonel turned slightly. "Not enough to count as attention. We are not authorizing anything that breaks the 200-meter regulation. It's not an authorization issue," she said. "It's math. Give me a spot and time and I will eliminate their anchor points without endangering ours." A captain let out a dry laugh that cracked in the middle. "You'll rescue the battalion with a scoped opinion, Sergeant. Stay in your lane." From the doorway, the same young Marine who enjoyed the nickname added his chorus line. "Dead weight wants a field mission." Radios made new sounds, the flattened words of men who have reached the edge. A squad leader tried to climb from panic to command and stumbled. "Command. This is Bravo. We are trapped. Casualties growing. We cannot advance. We cannot retreat. We need." The colonel requested artillery clearance. The reply came late and wrong for the angles. Smoke got proposed and rejected. The wind would turn it against the trapped forces. The drones switched angles and landed on a frame that showed just enough of the position on the ridge to make Elena's palms itch. Dust coughed from the barrel. The sweep ticked like a clock. She knew the space between pulses. She knew the opening her bullet required. She unzipped the weapon case. The sound was small, but a senior sergeant near the door still glanced up, ready to correct something. The M40A5 came free with the honest weight of metal and glass. She checked the mechanism by touch, locked a magazine and shouldered the strap. "I can stop this," she whispered. She said it for the metal and for the muscle memory of following orders that tried to pull her back to the wall. It had kept her silent for months. "Sergeant," the senior sergeant said, defaulting to basic authority. "Where are you taking that?" "Outside." Before the next word arrived, a call sign she recognized cut off halfway. Another voice stumbled in gulping panic. 200-meter regulation stands. The colonel repeated as if saying it itself created protection. Nobody moved. The men who had laughed looked at their hands. The ones who had whispered found nothing worth mentioning. Officers rearranged procedures. The monitors kept showing a truth that didn't care whether anyone was comfortable seeing it. Elena grabbed the weapon. Elena looked from screen to door and back again. The angles out there were wrong, but not impossible. The distances were tough, but not beyond the weapon's capability. She imagined a shallow saddle on the near ridge, and a firing lane running through the anchor points. 2 shots to break the pattern, a third to keep it broken. Nobody requested her strategy. Nobody requested anything. The room had decided that waiting was safer than choosing. She had been patient. She had been silent. She had written doctrine in notebooks nobody read. The valley was asking the oldest question, and she knew the response. She breathed once and spoke for a third time. Softer, steadier. "I can stop this." They ignored her. Elena didn't wait for approval. She walked out of the command center with her weapon slung across her chest, helmet secured low and jaw set like steel. Nobody followed. Nobody blocked her. The men who had insulted her sat in silence, watching the camera, content to let regulations write a death notice for 480 Marines. She moved through the base like a ghost, past vehicles covered in dust and stacks of boxes that smelled of fuel and sweat. Her boots hit the ground with a rhythm steadier than her heartbeat. In her vest pocket, her father's old identification tag knocked softly against her chest with every step. The metal was worn thin from years of his time and months of hers, the letters fading but not long. At the edge of the base, she checked her gear. Suppressed M40A5 across her shoulder, extra magazines tight in their holders, distance finder clipped to her belt, and notebook pages folded into a plastic sleeve tucked near her heart. She had everything she required, not for recognition, not for protocol but for mathematics and survival. The climb to the observation ridge was punishing. Loose rock shifted underfoot, and the slope resisted her with every step. She kept her body low, moving with the patience of someone who had practiced this kind of approach in her mind 1,000 times. Her face collected dust. Her sleeves scraped against rock, but she kept advancing, steady as her breathing, until she reached the top of a ridge that curved just enough to hide her outline. She lay flat, settled the support legs, and let the world shrink into her scope. The valley below was chaos made visible. Marines huddled behind smoking vehicles, pinned under sheets of fire from every direction. Gun flashes dotted the ridges. Rocket teams shifted positions, searching for angles. Dust rose in violent clouds where rounds chewed earth. The battalion was being destroyed alive in slow motion. Elena pressed her face to the stock. Her crosshairs steadied on a machine gun nest, 900 meters out, perched in a rocky ridge. The gun spat fire in steady rhythm, pinning an entire squad flat in the dirt. She exhaled. The crosshair froze. She squeezed. The suppressed crack rolled into the valley like a whisper. A fraction of a second later, the machine gunner dropped, the weapon stuttering silent. For a heartbeat, the valley paused. Marines lifted their heads, confused. Then the radios exploded. Who's shooting? Command. Do we have air cover? Negative. No aircraft cleared. Elena chambered the next round, eyes already shifting. A second target appeared. A rocket team, one man steadying the launcher, the other loading a rocket. They crouched barely 70 meters from a pinned squad. The tube angled toward a smoking vehicle. Elena measured the arc, read the wind off the smoke, and fired. The gunner collapsed before he could squeeze the trigger. The rocket tumbled harmlessly into the dirt. Marines on the ground yelled over the radio. What the hell? Who the hell's covering us? She didn't respond. She just moved, crawling forward 3 meters to shift her angle, dragging herself low so that her shape merged with the rocks. The enemy reacted fast. Sniper reflections sparked from the opposite ridge, sweeping the slope like searching light. Elena pressed flat, heartbeat calm, fingers tracing the dirt, until she felt its coolness settle her. She slid sideways inch by inch, until she found a new spot behind a scatter of stone. She propped the weapon again, scope swinging toward the valley's northern edge. She worked methodically. Each shot was not about destruction, but about cutting connections. One command leader collapsed mid-instruction, his squad scattering without direction. A machine gunner on the western slope jerked back from his tripod. The line of fire broke it. A squad leader rallying fighters vanished into dust, leaving their advance stuttering. Every trigger pull wasn't just removal, it was creation. Each gap widened, each silence lengthened, each Marine bought a few more breaths. The kill box began to unravel. On the radio, confusion turned to understanding. This isn't air support. This is a rifle. Who's got observation position? Eyes left. Something's cutting the ridges. Elena's breathing slowed. Her world narrowed to mathematics. Distance, wind, time. She let the scope swing, calculated adjustments in a blink, and executed without hesitation. Her sleeve rode up as she shifted positions, the cloth catching on rock. For the first time in months, the tattoo on her arm showed in the open. The Marine sniper symbol. Clear, undeniable, earned, not a decoration, not a mistake, an identity. Her scars, too, caught the light. Thin white lines along her knuckles, old burns that had never fully faded. They spoke of a past she hadn't shared, missions written into her skin, that others had chosen to erase from her record for the sake of politics. But now, those scars spoke louder than any rejection. Command, do you see this? A lieutenant on the ground shouted. We've got a ghost on observation. And then a new voice, weathered and unmistakable, cut into the radio. The SEAL leader who had been moving with the battalion. Call sign check, he demanded. Who the hell's firing cover? Elena didn't respond, but someone else did. Someone on the operations channel who had access to her personnel file. Phantom 7. A technician whispered, amazed. It's Phantom 7. The radio went silent for a moment. The kind of silence that means every single person is listening. The commander's tone shifted from suspicion to amazement. Wait, Phantom 7. That's Elena Marquez. A stunned pause followed, then a Marine's voice. Breathless. No way. Dead weight is Phantom 7, and suddenly the battlefield itself seemed to hold its breath. Because Phantom 7 wasn't a name they insult, it was a call sign whispered in sniper training, tied to impossible shots and unconfirmed distances. A reputation built before politics had pushed her into the background. The colonel back in the command room went stiff, staring at the feed, at the weapons flicker in the dust. Understanding crept over his face like a shadow. The support person nobody wanted was the only one holding the battalion together. Elena ignored it all. She kept firing. Her scope danced ridge to ridge, carving open openings where there had been only barriers. The kill box was becoming a pass, the valley shifting from grave to exit. She never raised her voice, never claimed recognition. She just pressed trigger after trigger, each shot an answer to the doubt that had followed her for months. And in that moment, every Marine who had laughed at her, every sergeant who had dismissed her, every officer who had kept her on the sidelines, watched as Sergeant Elena Marquez, Phantom 7, rewrote the battlefield one round at a time. The valley that had seemed like a coffin just hours earlier now churned with the thunder of helicopter blades. Dust spiraled into choking clouds as the first helicopters dropped into the passage. Elena had carved with her weapon. Marines stumbled and sprinted toward the landing zone, some dragging wounded brothers, others covering with the last rounds they had left. Every one of them knew that the difference between a slaughter and a miracle was a single weapon hidden on the ridge. Elena stayed flat, scope fixed, her face pressed to the Each helicopter arrival brought a new target. A gun flashed too close to the landing zone. An enemy fighter sprinting for a last shot at revenge. A shadow moving where there shouldn't have been one. She eliminated them with the same cold patience she had shown on the range. Half-second squeezes, controlled breathing. The radio crackled with something she hadn't heard all day. Hope. First group is up. Taking aboard the wounded. Second bird. Incoming. Passage holding. Command. This is Trident Actual. Phantom 7 has us covered. Repeat. Phantom 7 has us covered. Her call sign passed like electricity through the radio. Voices steadied. Marines who had been gasping now spoke with clipped efficiency. The fight shifted from survival to extraction. The SEAL commander's voice, steady now, broke the tension with formal weight. All units report accountability. One by one, squads checked in. At first, there were gaps, silence where names should have been. Then voices filled those spaces. Bravo secured. Charlie accounted for. Delta moving to Bird. When the last squad leader called in, the commander exhaled into the radio. All 480 accounted for. 0 left behind. The words hit harder than any gunfire. 0 left behind. An outcome nobody in that command room had believed possible. When the first ambush detonated, Elena didn't celebrate. She cycled the mechanism, scanned the ridges one last time, and tracked each helicopter until it lifted clear. Only when the final rotor blurred into the sky did she slide the safety on and ease her face from the stock. Her hands were steady, her face blank. The climb down was slower, every step heavy with exhaustion she wouldn't show. By the time she reached the edge of the base, the helicopters were already arriving, battered Marines spilling out, medics rushing forward. Dust covered everything in the color of bone. But something else filled the air now. Silence. Not the silence of fear or rejection. The silence of respect. Marines lined the path back into the base. No laughter, no grins. Helmets tucked under arms. Eyes fixed on her as she walked past. Men who had moved away from her in the dining hall now stood still, shoulders squared, acknowledging without words. She felt their eyes but didn't seek them. She carried her weapon at her side, strap cutting across her chest, boots leaving prints in the dust. At the far end of the line stood the colonel. His posture was regulation perfect, his jaw tight. When she stopped in front of him, the weight of the base seemed to hang in the space between them. "You disobeyed direct orders," he said, voice sharp enough to slice the silence. Elena stood at attention, weapon resting against her leg. "Yes, sir." The pause stretched. The men around them held their breath. Then the colonel's voice softened, breaking under something older than rules. "You saved a battalion." The words hung like a verdict. For the first time his eyes actually met hers. Not her name tag, not her file. Before she could respond, another figure stepped forward. the SEAL commander. Dust streaked his uniform, grime on his helmet, eyes bloodshot from hours of combat. He came to a halt in front of her, raised his hand in a sharp salute, and held it with the kind of gravity that turned a gesture into a monument. "Phantom 7, he said, voice formal but heavy with sincerity. "The valley owes you." The Marines behind him shifted. Helmets came on. Some lowered their heads. Others whispered. Voices barely audible, but carrying in the silence. "She carried us. Dead weight saved the battalion." "No, Phantom 7 did." The stillness broke into applause. Not the wild cheers of celebration, but the deep resonant sound of men acknowledging something greater than themselves. Hands clapped. Boots stomped. Voices murmured. In reverence. Elena didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply lowered her eyes and said, "I was just doing my duty, sir." The colonel nodded once, slow and deliberate, as though the motion itself admitted how wrong he had been. The SEAL commander dropped his salute and extended a hand. She shook it, her grip firm, her scars visible against his calloused palm. For Elena, it wasn't vindication. It wasn't even relief. It was accuracy. She had done what her training demanded, what her father's lessons had prepared her for, what her notebooks had whispered in the quiet of long nights. She had seen the mathematics, and she had solved it. The applause continued behind her as she walked toward the armory. The identification tag on her chest tapped against her vest with each step, steady as a heartbeat. She slipped inside, set her weapon on the bench, and began the methodical ritual of taking it apart, cleaning it, logging every shot in her notebook. The numbers mattered, the method mattered, the recognition was noise. But outside those walls, something had shifted forever. The Marines who had insulted her would never again call her dead weight. The officers who had dismissed her would never again ignore her hand in a meeting. The silence that had once been filled with jeers was now filled with respect, too heavy to be spoken. And for the battalion, the story would live in the only way stories ever truly live, retold by men who had been there. "We should have died in that valley," they would say. But Phantom 7 was watching. True courage, the narrator's voice reminds us, often hides behind quiet patience. It doesn't roar, it waits, steady and unseen, until the moment the world finally needs it. And when it arrives, it doesn't ask for recognition. It simply does its duty, and in doing so changes everything. One sniper, overlooked and doubted, refused to let rules bury 480 Marines. Her shots rewrote fate, turning a kill box into a passage of survival. Sergeant Elena Marquez proved that patience and training can change history when courage refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, honor her sacrifice by saluting in the comments below. Tell us, where are you watching from tonight? And don't forget, subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories, so these tales of duty, valor, and sacrifice are never forgotten. Your voice keeps their legacy alive.